Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Show. I'm Martin Geisler. Even in the context of recent times, the planet feels particularly precarious as we wake up this Sunday morning, doesn't it? Overnight, the United States blasted its way into a war between Israel and Iran. Who knows what's going to happen next? But the whole world is braced. I'll discuss this with Douglas Alexander, former International Development Secretary and Senior International Affairs Fellow at Harvard University. He is a UK Government Trade Minister these days, and his department is due to make a major announcement tomorrow, investing in industry. Well, what does that mean for us here in Scotland? I'll ask him about that as well. And Fergus Ewing, a titan of SNP politics from a family of huge SNP figures, has left the party and announced he will stand against them at next year's election. Why? He'll join me and I'll ask him. After that, it is over to Graham Stewart on the radio and on BBC Sounds. Hi, Graham.
Morning, Martin. We'll continue with analysis of the US-Iran conflict with our reporters and commentators in the Middle East, the US and here at home. There's a review of the Sunday papers with David Clegg, editor of The Courier, and the freelance journalist Katrina Stewart. And 50 years since Jaws first terrified cinema audiences, we'll explain one of the star's connections to Orkney.
Excellent, Graham. Thanks very much indeed for that. More from Graham at 10:30. Right, lots to get into this morning. Let's get on with the show. Yeah, there is a lot to discuss this morning, isn't there? You can have your say in what you hear this morning as well. Just drop us a note on social media. Let us know what you think of what you're hearing. The hashtag, as ever, is BBC Sunday Show, if you want to do that. Right, the UK Labour government hasn't had an easy first year in office, has it? They've had to U-turn on some policies, pull back on others. The economy's not exactly in rude health just now. And of course, the Middle East is on the brink. Need we remind you of that this morning? They will tell you they have their sleeves rolled up. They're getting stuck into all of this, issue by issue. And tomorrow they're going to unveil a new strategy to boost British industry. So what's that going to mean here in Scotland? How's it going to work? Well, I'm pleased to say the Minister for Trade and Economic Security, Douglas Alexander, joins me now from London. Good morning, Mr. Alexander.
Good morning.
We'll get on to all of that in a minute, but clearly first I need to ask you about the news we're waking up to this morning. You spent much of your career inside and outside of politics dealing with international affairs. How worried are you at what you're hearing this morning? And if you don't mind, could you just answer that from a personal perspective as much as a political one? I think a lot of people are waking up this morning thinking, are we going to be all right? What do you say to them?
Of course, I understand that people will have woken up this morning to the news that was breaking overnight with a real sense of concern. And I want to assure your viewers that the British government has been putting contingencies in place. There have been a whole series of meetings. I and others have been attending COBRA meetings in the course of the week. So if you're in the region, our very clear advice is that if you are in Israel, if you're in the occupied Palestinian territories, or indeed in the unlikely circumstances that you're in Iran, we need you to register with the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. We are putting in place the ability for you to move overland from Israel, both to the Jordanian border and to the Egyptian border, where we have teams on the ground ready to receive you. And at the same time, we're looking at chartering flights to get UK nationals out of the region. So in that sense, there is a huge amount of work that has taken place over a whole sustained period of time to make sure that we were ready. We were not involved in this action, but we were informed. And in that sense, there's been a great deal of planning given for this moment.
When were you informed?
I'm not at liberty to share with you that information, but you can appreciate we have a strong and close security relationship with the United States. We took no part in this military action, but on the other hand, it's important to recognise that it's been the long-standing position of the British government of all stripes to oppose Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. There are very good reasons for that, and in that sense, we've been arguing in recent days for a diplomatic path. Alas, Iran did not take that action. We had our Foreign Secretary along with the two other representatives at E3 meeting with the Iranian Foreign Minister just in the last couple of days in Geneva. But nonetheless, in light of the action that's taken place, the position of the British government is clear, which is Iran needs to get back round the table. It cannot have those nuclear weapons or indeed that nuclear weapon programme. And that's why, even at this late stage, we are urging them to recognise that reality and to get round the table.
If you were informed about this by President Trump or by, you know, the American security services, were you concerned at any point as to the legality of this action?
Well, clearly, British military personnel are not involved in this action, and in that sense, the judgment in terms of what operational action was taken elsewhere. First in Israel in terms of the action that's been taken over recent days, and then in Washington in terms of the announcement that the President made overnight. That, respectfully, is a matter for them in terms of what informed their judgment. We have been very clear that Britain, while informed, has not been engaged in this action.
President Trump, well, you say you were informed. I don't know whether he consulted the EU or European allies. He kind of seems to be out on a limb in all of this at the moment. If it comes to a position where we have to make a choice as to where our loyalties lie, where do they lie? Do they lie with President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, or do they lie with Europe?
Well, I would take you back to the speech that the Prime Minister Keir Starmer made back in November in the Mansion House, his main foreign policy speech of the last year, in which he said, in the context of economic and trade policy, we are not going to choose between the European Union and the United States. And if you look at what has subsequently unfolded, not just in terms of the UK-EU summit that took place on the 19th of May, but also critically that first deal with the United States, seeing tariffs on our autos reduced from 25% to 10%, we are evidencing on a month-by-month, week-by-week basis that we are delivering on the Prime Minister's undertaking, that we're simply not going to choose between a United States, a security ally for 80 years or longer, and our friends, partners and neighbours in the European Union. OK,
that may become a delicate dance, but who knows how that's going to work. Look, before we move to domestic matters, let me just ask you this. You were International Development Secretary, basically Minister for Aid, for several years. When you hear reports of Palestinians being killed by tank fire and by drone fire as they queue for bread, what do you think?
I'm utterly horrified, and that's why consistently David Lammy and others within the British government have made clear that there needs to be full and unfettered access, not just for aid, but for aid workers to Gaza. It is absolutely fundamental, and we have been clear in opposing the Israeli approach to this, that international organisations like the International Rescue Committee, with decades of experience in providing humanitarian aid, should be able to get full and unfettered access to the Gaza Strip.
And are you comfortable that there is nothing more your government could or should be doing? Nothing at all? You're powerless to do anything more than you are to stop this?
No, I don't accept that we're powerless. We continue in every forum to take the opportunity to make the case for Israel to take a fundamentally different approach towards Gaza.
But what I'm asking is, are you telling me you're doing absolutely everything you can, could, should be doing to stop this?
Listen, I can assure you, whether in relation to Gaza or indeed what is now unfolding in relation to Iran, this is very high up the government's agenda. Of course, the responsibility of a British government is first and foremost to the citizens of the United Kingdom, but that does not absolve us of the responsibilities of working for a safer, more stable world, and we recognise the international community has responsibilities, and we're seeking to discharge those responsibilities.
Right. OK, look, let's turn our attention to domestic matters now, because there is a big new industrial strategy to be announced by your government tomorrow. I've been looking through, I mean, the announcement's tomorrow, but I've been looking through some of the details, such as we have them. £275 million across 8 sectors, which we're told will transform the UK's skills offer. What does that mean, and how transformative will it be?
So firstly, an aspect of skills policy is obviously devolved to Scotland. So in that sense, there will be Barnett consequentials, as you would expect, in relation to money flowing north. We've already made the largest settlement in the history of devolution to the Scottish Government. And we saw only last week, in terms of the spending review, further money coming to Scotland. For example, the supercomputer in Edinburgh. I was on the board of Edinburgh University, the University Court, over the 4 years before I was elected. Boris Johnson, to great fanfare, came and announced that where there was a hole in the ground, there was going to be a supercomputer for Edinburgh. But alas, as with so many announcements, there was no money behind the announcement.
OK.
The fact that only this week we were able to announce that money is evidence of the fact, whether it's in relation to the new investment going into the naval base on the Clyde at Faslane, whether it's the supercomputer in Edinburgh, there is real money following announcements being made by this government.
Let's have a look at that money, though, Mr Alexander, because you're saying £275 million. It's across 8 sectors. That's about £35 million a sector. You, as you say, were on the court of Edinburgh University. You will know that university burns through £120 million a month just to keep the lights on. That entire allocation, if it is allocated evenly for that sector, would be burned up by Edinburgh University in 10 days. And that's 35 million quid for the whole of the UK.
Well, if you are suggesting that there is a problem in terms of the sustainability of university finances in Scotland, then I'm in agreement with you. But as you'll know, Martin, that's the responsibility of the Scottish Government. If you look at the fee tariffs that are provided by the Scottish Government for students in Edinburgh University, and you compare them for a moment with the rest of the UK students, or indeed with international students, it explains why university principals like Peter Matheson and others have long been arguing that the Scottish Government need to recognise their responsibilities in terms of what is still one of our leading sectors. If you look at the outstanding work that is done in terms of life sciences, you look at the outstanding work on AI in Edinburgh University, you look at the leadership that's been shown in medical sciences in Glasgow University, frankly, I think the Scottish Government could and should be doing a better job. In contrast to that, we have been very clear that, unlike previous governments, we are committing real money to Edinburgh University to develop the supercomputer. The benefit of that, which will be the largest computer anywhere in the United Kingdom, is going to be manifest in terms of continued leadership on issues like AI. And I think about AI in terms of the industrial strategy as being a bit akin to the internet in about 1999. It's about to transform everything. So the fact that Scotland has real leadership through this supercomputer being placed in Edinburgh is, to my mind, evidence of a government that's already getting on with the job of delivery.
I've been looking through your manifesto from last year. You certainly promised to do stuff like this when you were coming in. You said, we'll back what makes Britain great, our excellent research institutes. You'll tell me that's what's going on. I'll tell you that 35 million quid's not going to make that much difference across the whole of the UK. But here's another line. We'll work with industry to remove barriers to growth. How did putting up national insurance for businesses affect that? Because many have gone down because of that, because of that policy.
So let me give you an example of taking down barriers to growth. The Scotch Whisky Association has just recognised, this is their words, not mine, that they're going to see about £1 billion worth of extra sales, more than 1,000 extra jobs created in what are often fragile rural communities economically in Scotland.
I'm asking about national insurance and your policy to increase national insurance for businesses.
Coming down,
just what
I'm
impact
explaining to you
I'm asking you about national insurance and what impact you think that has had on growth.
Forgive me, Martin. I was explaining that if you ask for an example of barriers
coming down... You're answering a different question.
OK, well, if you want me to answer on barriers, let's take that and then we'll come to national insurance.
OK.
On barriers coming down, we've just secured a deal with India that takes tariffs on whisky from 140% to 75% and then ultimately to 40%. That is transformative. India is not only one of the world's largest economies, but also one of the world's largest economies with very high rates of tariffs. So when you say, give me an example of where barriers are coming down, that seems to me a very tangible and practical example of how the hard, diligent work of this government has actually delivered new opportunities, new jobs, and ultimately new investment for Scotland.
Except I didn't say that. I said, how do you think your policy to increase national insurance for businesses has impacted economic growth?
So businesses benefit from stable public finances, and the truth is we inherited a black hole in the public finances when we came into office in July. I know that people groan when they hear politicians say this is what we inherited, so let me give you a practical example. When we arrived in the Department of Business and Trade, it was commonplace that we needed to provide support to postmasters who had suffered as a consequence of the Horizon scandal. We came into the department on the first day, we opened the books, it had been a matter of cross-party legislation, not a single penny had been provided for the Horizon payments in the Department of Business and Trade's budget line. That was just one example of what we encountered department after department after department. So yes, we took some difficult decisions back in the autumn to stabilise the public finances, give us the foundation on which to make the largest ever commitment of resource to the Scottish Parliament and to the Scottish Government, about £50 billion in terms of public expenditure. That has to come from somewhere, and we recognise that business has to make a contribution, not just to the improvement of public services, but also to the transformation that we're going to be witnessing in the years ahead.
Right. I mean, you made some hard decisions, some of which you're having to go back on now because they were fairly calamitous politically, I would suggest. But let me ask you this. Lots of the 8 sectors you're going to help with this new strategy really matter here in Scotland. Clean energy, defence, digital technology, financial services, life sciences, all really significant employers up here. You say we'll work with the devolved governments on this, driving growth and helping industry all across the country. To what extent were the Scottish Government involved in drawing up this policy? Because you're now also Minister responsible for handling the relationships between the devolved governments, aren't you? How's all that going?
Well, we have very regular dialogues with the Scottish Government in relation to trade. I was talking to Richard Lochhead, to Kate Forbes and to others. That's been paralleled in terms of the work, not just that Ian Murray as the Secretary of State, but Sarah Jones as the Industry Minister, Jonathan Reynolds as the Secretary of State. We have a whole series of government relations, which I have to say, I think is working much more effectively than I've witnessed in recent years, where partly for reasons of political advantage, there was often performative disagreements between our predecessors and between the Scottish Government. The truth is we have a shared interest, not just in the well-being and the welfare of the Scottish people, but the prosperity of the Scottish economy. That's why, using the might and strength of the British state, we went to work to deliver that Indian trade deal. It's why we worked to remove barriers in relation to SPS at the European border as part of the European reset. So I think the British Government is showing up, but we arrive with an open heart and an open mind in terms of how to work effectively with our colleagues in the Scottish Government to the benefit of the Scottish people.
Right. I mean, the trade deals, I must pull you up on that as well. The trade deals you're referring back to repeatedly, the Financial Times in an editorial recently said they were nothing more than a sidebar.
Well, the truth is, I would dispute that. If you're one of the 34,000 direct employees of Jaguar Land Rover, it's not an academic dispute or even a learned article in the Financial Times that you would be thinking about this weekend. You would be thinking, I've still got my job. The truth is, JLR had a business model where the largest market for exports is the United States. If they suddenly had a 25% tariff imposed upon their business, that fundamentally questioned their business model.
So this is a Brexit dividend, isn't it? If we were still in the EU, they'd be on the dole. So if you're using that as an example, this is unarguably a dividend of Brexit.
Well, listen, I'm more interested in new markets than old arguments. The fact is, we did have a responsibility because our trade with the European Union is about, 46% of the UK's trade, to resetting that relationship as well. So not only have we done that deal that protects Jaguar Land Rover, but at the same time, we've generated about £9 billion of value in terms of the work that we're doing, not just on SPS, but also on the ETS and the work that we've done at the UK-EU summit.
Okay.
So this is a government that's delivering both on Europe and on the United States, at the same time reaching into Asian markets like India.
Let me ask you one final question, Mr. Alexander, then I'm going to let you go. It's a question I ask every politician from a pro-union party who comes onto this programme, and it's interesting always to see the answers. And the question is this: if this is a voluntary union, as everybody always seems to agree, nobody denies it is, what is the democratic route out of this union for Scotland if they decide that that's what they want to do?
Well, the truth is, it's a matter of record that John Swinney, the First Minister of Scotland leading the Scottish National Party, is recorded as not even raising the issue of independence frequently when he talks to the Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
What's the democratic route out of the union for Scotland? Well, should that be the wish of the Scottish people?
Well, ultimately, we had our referendum, Martin. We had it back in 2014.
So there is no democratic route out now?
No, we had our referendum back in 2014, and the people of Scotland, in our wisdom, chose by 55% to 45% to stay within the United Kingdom. I believe everything we're witnessing in terms of quite how challenging the international environment is, the international security environment in the Euro-Atlantic area, never mind the situation in the Middle East, the economic challenges that the world is facing, only strengthens the case for Scotland's best future sitting within the United Kingdom.
And I'm asking you how you achieve that. You can't give me the answer.
To make their case for separation, I strongly believe we are stronger together and we would be weaker apart.
All right, Douglas Alexander, we must leave it there and let you go. But thank you very much indeed for giving us your time this Sunday morning. Now then, Tommy Sheridan, remember him? Firebrand politician, jailbird, famous socialist, all of that and more. He was my guest on Scottcast earlier this week. It was a fascinating conversation. Let's give you just a quick snatch of it. Here he is telling me about his time in prison.
It can be a very, very lonely experience. It can also be a very tough experience because there's a lot of damaged people there. Some people who could do with some mental health interventions, and it can therefore become a very violent place.
I'm just telling you about all this to shamelessly plug Scottcast, which I present. We talked about a whole load of stuff, Tommy and I. You can hear the full interview on Scottcast. It is our daily news and current affairs podcast. Every Monday to Thursday it comes out. You can get it on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcast. There's a whole back catalogue of 90-odd episodes sitting there waiting for you just now. So go on, dive in. Right, the name Ewing goes through the Scottish National Party like the letters on a stick of rock. Fergus Ewing's been one of the totemic figures in the party since the Scottish Parliament formed. His mother Winnie helped to create modern nationalism. His wife Margaret, his sister Annabel, both big figures in the party too. So it's really come to something when a man with that background walks away from the party he's been steeped in all of his life and decides to stand against them. But that's what Fergus Ewing says he will do at the Holyrood elections next year. He joins me now from his home in the Highlands. Good morning, Mr. Ewing.
Good morning, Martin.
We've got a bit of a delay on the line, but we'll work with it. Listen, I was just going through the kind of family dynasty. So why now? Why is now the time to walk away from the SNP? What's tipped the balance?
It's been a difficult and very sad to say loyalty to many, many friends over 50 years service in the SNP. But reasons, Martin. First of all, I'm a Highland MSP. My job is to stand to represent and speak out for the people that voted me in. For 6-8 elections, I've campaigned and argued vociferously for safer roads for the Highlands, for the A9 and the A96 be dualled. And indeed, we promised them since 2011 we got off to a fair start promises. And I cannot defend the indefensible. Secondly, the SNP in the days of my mother Winnie stood for people first. It stood up and championed our oil and gas workers, fishermen, farmers, foresters, every walk of life. And we showed that we cared. Now we appear to have turned our back on many of them. And that is simply wrong. And thirdly, standing back from this, Martin, I do fear in every parliament for 26 years, reputation parliament itself is being harmed, particularly by the performance and problems over the last 4 years.
Right, look, we're struggling with this line to you, Fergus, but I'll stick with it for now. I'm bound to ask you whether or not this is a wise course of action. If you stand against the SNP, there is a significant possibility, is there not, that you split the vote and let another party through the middle. The last time round in the Holyrood elections in Inverness and Nairn, the Tories were about 20 points behind you, but if the vote between you and the SNP is split, do you not fear you'll allow them in?
I don't think that will happen. I'm fighting to win. I had a large majority, a fairly large personal vote. I take nothing for granted. I am doing this because I think it's the right thing to do for my constituents, for democracy in Scotland, in the sense that I want to see, not to bring anybody down, but to raise the standard of the Parliament and to speak out. And it was Edwin Morgan, wasn't it, the great national bard, who said about the Scottish Parliament, what people don't want is a nest of fearties. And that doesn't serve anyone's interests, MSPs selected by party leaders on a list, instead of which there should be an open list where people can pick whoever they wish from that list. So I believe it's the right decision, and I will be sure the party will throw everything into it, every effort, the kitchen sink, and perhaps even the camper van.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, most of the policies that you really seem to object to, apart from the A9 duelling, were really trademarks of the Nicola Sturgeon era, the Humza Yousaf era. They've now gone and John Swinney's in there. You go back a long way with John Swinney, and you've decided, no, that now is the time to jump. Have you spoken to him about it?
Well, no, I haven't, but I have, I think, given clear, fair warning, not least in March, when I said, look, I'm minded to stand as an independent. I cannot stand for the SNP and defend the indefensible. But will you make significant, substantial progress on the A9 and the A96? Now, they haven't. They've spent £100 million on the duelling of the A96, and not 1 centimetre of tarmac has been laid. And we have all but 2 of the sections of the A9 haven't been duelled. We don't know how it will be financed, and there is no timetable at all for the Nairn bypass. That's just unacceptable. And it's not really a matter of how many seats the SNP get, it's how it's perceived by the people of Scotland. That surely is a far bigger issue. And obviously, having lost 65,000 members, 3/4 of its MPs, and 10 to 15% of the opinion polls, I challenge anyone in the SNP to put their hand on heart and say, we've done well.
Just very briefly, in a sentence, if you could, are you going to stand as a single-issue candidate then? Are you going to be the kind of A9 and A96 candidate?
I want to finish that business. That's my unfinished business. But wider than that, Martin, I'm going to be putting out a whole series of proposals about how we can improve devolution as a whole, including picking the best of people from each of the main parties, because we may need, as has happened in Germany and Ireland, to have a firewall against extreme options. That's what's happened in Germany and Ireland. It may seem fanciful that the main parties in Scotland can work together, but that won't be so fanciful if Reform end up the second party after the next election. And I profoundly believe, and I have espoused this in my 14 years as a minister and 26 years as an MSP, that we must work better together. Otherwise, Scotland is fractious and tribal and divided. That is not in the interests of any nationalist movement.
All right, Fergus Ewing, we're going to leave it there, but it's not the last we've heard from you. I can forecast that with some certainty. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, though, this Sunday morning. Fergus Ewing there. Right. Phil Sim is our political correspondent. He joins me in the studio now. Morning, Phil. Look, back to the story that we're covering at the top of this. Grave concerns about what's happening in the Middle East. The First Minister's been tweeting about that this morning, or posting on social media, I think we say now, don't we?
Yeah, so the First Minister, John Swinney, posting this morning that the Middle East conflict has reached an alarmingly greater level of danger after the US attacks on Iran. He says the conflict must be stopped by a diplomatic solution delivered through the international community, and he's calling on the UK government to insist on that now. In fairness, that is pretty much in line with what Keir Starmer has been doing this morning. He's called for Iran to return to the negotiating table. He says stability in the region is a priority, but he has described Iran's nuclear program as a grave threat to international security. So arguably maybe a more strongly worded response from John Swinney, demanding an immediate end to the conflict. But I think from both of them, the key thing is that they're both calling for diplomacy to come to the fore. And I think, you know, politicians who are very much odds on the domestic front, but I think John Swinney and Keir Starmer quite often find themselves in the same place internationally, and they're both calling for a diplomatic solution here.
Right. Look, to domestic matters now. That interview with Fergus Ewing, the Scottish Parliament is very much your natural habitat. What do you make of it? How big a moment is this?
I mean, I think it is a big moment, given, as you rehearsed at the top, the sort of family history of the Ewings running right through the history of the SNP. I mean, I think I worked out between Fergus, Annabelle, Winnie and Margaret, there's 102 years of parliamentary representation from Ewings for the SNP in the Scottish, UK and European parliaments. It's an interesting just challenge for the SNP about the question of keeping, you know, the big tents together. They've always had a sort of range of different ideological perspectives within the party, which are brought together under the banner of independence. And it's just interesting if they're struggling to keep people in that tent. And it's going to be a really interesting contest in that seat Inverness and Nairn. As you pointed out, Tories second last time. The Lib Dems won the Westminster seat last year. You got the SNP and obviously an independent candidate in Fergus Ewing. Long time since we've had an independent MSP directly elected, but the Highlands is a strong area for it. So going to be a really interesting one to watch.
The Ewings and dynasty are the big words here. If you're a fan of TV in the 1980s, you will know this is set to be a soap opera. Forgive that bad joke. Right, listen, we're going to leave you just now, but look, here's a new innovation right there. It's a QR code. If you go and get your phone, get your specs, do whatever you need to do, open your camera, click on that. So no excuses. The Sunday show continues over there right through till lunchtime. So do that, or just tune into BBC Sounds. If you're with us on the telly just now, I will be back same time, same place next week. If you're with us on the radio or using this QR code, here's Graham Stewart.